Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome to the game 2 of the super match between the world champion Magnus Carlsen and the Rameshbabu Praggnanandhaa from the last round of the FTX Crypto Cup tournament in 2022. The first game ended in a draw. We have covered already the game, but it was really a tough battle between Praggu and Magnus, in which Praggu had, I think, a great opportunity to win the game with the black pieces. Eventually the game ended in a draw, so Magnus, I think, got a little bit away with the murder in game 1, but now we're in game 2, where of course new things can happen. Praggu can take the lead, Magnus can take the lead, but even if someone wins the game, still we'll see 2 additional games. So as I said, it's not a critical moment of the game, but already a tough game 2 we'll see now immediately. So let's see now what happened here. Praggu played with the white pieces and Magnus played with the black pieces. So Praggu opened with the move d4. We have knight to f6 by Magnus, c4, e6, and after move knight to f3 we have the anti-Nimzo or counter Nimzo Indian setup. Black cannot play anymore. I mean, in a good way, I think, the move bishop to b4, because white didn't play, of course, the move knight to c3. So in this anti-Nimzo or counter Nimzo Indian setup, you're not allowing this annoying pin by the bishop. So that's why Magnus transposes now into the queen's gambit declined with the move d5, and after move knight to c3 we have now the 3 knights variation. So Magnus goes now into the so-called Ragozin defense with the move bishop to b4. In my opinion, my honest opinion, the Ragozin defense is one of the best defenses that you can choose if you're playing maybe with the black pieces against d4. The cool part about the Ragozin is, of course, that you're playing really a dynamic game already. Still you have your beautiful pin against the knight, still you have created already a dynamic in the center of the board, still you have opportunities to include into the knight into the game, still you have opportunities to play c5. You can further be aggressive in the center of the board. So beautiful opening it is. So as I said, if you want to study it, I've created also a series about the Ragozin defense on my YouTube channel. Maybe you can check it out and study then from both sides. But okay, let's see now what happened here. We have the so-called Alekhine variation of the Ragozin defense played by Praggu. The idea is clear. After move queen to a4, black needs now to play the move knight to c6, because if you play, of course, c6, you lose the bishop. So this move, the queen to a4, the so-called Alekhine variation, is not allowing here black at least to make further progress with the move c5, to be aggressive further with the move c5. So here in the continuation we have e3, kingside castling, and now queen to c2. Now these days, I think also very popular line is to play the move bishop to d2, leaving a little bit here the protection on dark squares, because this is quite annoying bishop, this bishop on b5. If you play something like bishop to d3, immediately the threat is always this move, bishop to d7. So still you have to lose one tempo with the queen in order to escape. So the queen temporarily blocked maybe the c5 progress, but now becomes actually a problem, tactical problem for white. So as I said, still so many beautiful lines are possible for white and for black, so it's quite a beautiful opening, as I said. But okay, after kingside castling, as I said, bishop to d2, bishop to d3 wasn't played. Magnus got challenged by Praggu's move queen to c2, and now the idea is clear. We want to play a3, b4, maybe even c5 if the position allows it. But now Magnus plays quite an interesting line, knight to a5, and this is, in my opinion, the best way here for black to go, because this is a forcing move. Here white needs now to make immediately a reaction. You can play the move c takes d5, or you can play the move c5. These are, I think, 2 choices now for white. Maybe you can just stop a little bit and evaluate the position after c5 or c takes d5. I'm more of a fan of the move c5, because after move c takes d5 that Praggu played and e takes d5, look at this bishop that you're basically keeping out of game is getting now actively into the game. That's what I don't like about this move c takes d5. I'm not saying it's a mistake or something that white is playing here. The evaluation is about equal about both of these lines, but I simply like to keep a little bit further this light square bishop locked here on the starting square c8, because it's always a little bit paralyzed by its own pawn structure. After move c5, the game would lead into something like this. b6 would be then an opportunity for black to break the position further. You have to play the bishop to d2, b takes c5, but now with a3, bishop to c3, bishop to c3, the knight has to step back, and now after something like, I don't know, d takes c5, the knight is coming into the game. So it's quite an unpleasant unpleasant game, I think, for both sides. Really wild things can happen in this particular position. So, but maybe this is also a way to go. So as I said, you can be the judge of the c5 or c takes d5. Praggu played in the game c takes d5. We have e takes d5, and now bishop to d3. Here, Praggu at least has this beautiful battery on light squares. Now Magnus shows his really sharp mind. He attacks the position immediately with the move c5, and many of us, I think, wouldn't play the game like this. Many of us, I think, would play something like rook to e8, trying maybe to get some kind of a nice grip around the square. E4 would maybe try some ideas of b6, c5, but Magnus played c5 immediately, although he's keeping now an isolated pawn on d5, and I'm sure that many of us have trouble playing with an isolated pawn, because that's something that you basically don't want to get in the middle game stage. But Magnus is Magnus. Magnus knows how to play against the isolated pawn, how to play with an isolated pawn, how to break the position, how to slow down the pace of the game, how to improve the minor pieces. So he can basically choose really flexible ideas in the middle game stage. That's, I think, the thing that makes Magnus Carlsen the best player in the world, because he can change really the outcome in the middle game really in a beautiful way. And many times I've seen in a beautiful match game it has been played. I'm sorry if I'm bothering a little bit, but it's quite interesting what I saw. Magnus Carlsen, for instance, played his match game on chess.com against Hikaru Nakamura, and then he played with the hanging pawn structure against Hikaru Nakamura, won the game with the hanging pawn structure, and then he played against Hikaru's hanging pawn structure, then also he won the game. So that's really tough what Magnus is doing. So he's really here playing already a beautiful line. So after move d takes c5, Magnus retreats, knight to c6, and now he's preparing d4, because when you have an isolated pawn, you want to break through here in the center of the board. So we have now bishop to d2, and this was maybe the first inaccurate move by Praggu. You have to play, I think, here the move h3. It is an annoying move that maybe you're delaying a little bit your development, but it's at least prophylactic move, because bishop to g4 could come, and you see black is already battling for the d4 breakthrough. So black is trying to get rid of this isolated pawn. You don't want to have an isolated pawn through the whole game, so that's why here a3 would be, I think, a slightly more accurate move by Praggu. So here after move bishop to d4, Magnus simply took bishop to c5, and still he has now the opportunity to break and enter with the move d4. So we have here knight to e2, Magnus plays now knight to b4, and here Praggu played simply queen to b1, knight takes d3, and queen to d3. So still nothing wrong with this position. Magnus is having this isolated pawn. White can play a beautiful blockade around the square d4. So far I think mission accomplished also by Praggu. So he's having good chances also in the game, because now he'll have a beautiful grip around the square d4. So Magnus continues with the move the knight to e4, knight from f to d4, and now a5. So Magnus is not allowing this move. This move would be quite unpleasant for Magnus if b4 happens. So he's keeping his bishop on c5 on a beautiful active square, and he's preparing now the move b6 and bishop to a6. This is a move that I think bothers now white in the continuation of the game. So the light square bishop will become really now a beautiful piece all over the board. So here now, this is, I think, now really the critical moment of the game. Here Praggu played rook to c1, and there is this unwritten rule in chess that you should really secure the king by castling. You have to make progress. You have to keep your king safe. This move rook to c1 is simply too slow, because here, as I said, Praggu could have played kingside castling. Now probably Magnus would pull off the move b6, but now with, I don't know, rook from f to d1, or maybe rook from f to c1, you can maybe play bishop to a6, and now the queen steps back maybe to b1, still having a good position. You can also play queen to b3 or something, but at least you're getting out of the range of the light square bishop. But here after move rook to c1, you see b6, and now if you castle, it's simply too slow. Bishop to a6 is going to happen. Now you have to step back, queen to c2, and look at this, bishop to d4 is going to happen. Now if you take with the knight, the rook is hanged. So this development by Praggu was simply too slow. So after move b6 that Magnus Carlsen played, here we have bishop to c3 by Praggu. So he's keeping now still his position around the square d4. d4 compact, but now after move bishop to a6, the queen has to step back on a starting square. And already here Magnus is taking over. Magnus is playing now the game in a beautiful way. So as I said, the crucial mistake was this move rook to c1 instead of Carlsen kingside immediately. So here rook to c8, this is the way to go. You have to include now all of the pieces into the attack. Beautiful move by Magnus. We have kingside Carlsen, and now bishop to d4. This is now the move, I think, that's opening the position now in a beautiful way. The problem is now the main strength that you had, I think, in the game was at least this isolated pawn that you have created. Now you have to take out with the pawn. That's the main issue. E takes d4 has to be played here. Magnus calculated this position in a beautiful way, because if you take, of course, with the bishop here on d4, then you get a rook to c1. The knight cannot take, of course, because the rook is hanging. If you take out with the queen gets deflected from the defense of the knight. So really wild stuff. So you have to take now with the e pawn, and look at this now. As we said, you had your strength, you have battle against the isolated pawn. Now you have sort of an isolated pawn yourself. The bishop is blocked out. This is a much better bishop here. The rook is in the way. The knight is controlling the center of the board. So really a stunning, beautiful game here played by the world champion Magnus. So here Magnus continues simply his development. Queen to f6 connects the rook. He's finishing now all of the stages of the development. If you don't know the stages of the development, there are, of course, developing minor pieces, securing the king by castling, and moving the queen from the first rank and connect the rooks. Really good here development by the world champion. Although you could have also played f5. It's quite interesting, because after potential f3, I wanted to show you the main tactical goal of blacks here. Black is now really an attacking idea, sort of a winning idea that could, I think, work immediately. After move f3, this wasn't played in the game, but let's see really the beautiful, stunning idea here. After move f3, you can take. Again, I'm pointing out you cannot take here with the knight because the rook is hanging. You have to take maybe with the rook, but it's not working because after rook to c3, b takes c3, we are continuing simply the pressure here on the e file. You can maybe try to defend this position. Now we just build a battery. Even if you try, I don't know, king to f2, queen to e3 is going to happen. And now look at this, king to f1. Now we just grab the pawn, and this is a paralyzed position. The knight cannot move, the rook cannot move, the queen cannot move. So it's completely winning here for black. So this was the actual goal after potential f3 move. So the idea is clear. Knight takes c3, you can take with the knight, and then to create some kind of a further progress here on the e file. But okay, here Magnus, as we said, played queen to f6 instead of f5. Praggo's response was f3 anyway, so we have reached now similar position. Praggo again got challenged with this move, knight takes c3, again b takes c3. So here at least Praggo tried to keep his rook in the game and didn't allow further trades of rooks. Now Magnus continues with his plan. Queen to e7, rook to e8 could have been played. He has continued simply the pressure on the e file. So we have a rook to e1, queen to e3, a beautiful check, and now simply building this beautiful battery here on the e file. So we have here now knight to g3. Praggo is getting out of the range, but now after queen to e1, a rook to e1, a rook to e1, and now g6. The position leads now into complicated line for white, because white still has this backward pawn on the c file. Now bishop to c4 is going to happen, and now black is simply pushing this pawn further, or maybe bishop to b5. If you protect this, then b5 b4 is a huge threat. So here black should be much better. So rook to c1, Praggo has now to defend this position. Rook to c4, played by Magnus Carlsen. Although you can play f5, b5 is also an opportunity, but Magnus plays a beautiful blockade. It's never allowing now here Praggo to make progress. We have knight to e2, a rook to a4. Magnus is continuing his pressure against also this weak pawn. We have a rook to c2, rook to a3. Now Magnus is threatening bishop takes e2, and then a rook takes c3. So we have knight to c1, bishop to b5, king to g1, and now bishop to a4, simply attacking further the rook. The rook has to step back. We have rook to rook to b2, and now after rook to c3 there's simply no time to take out the pawn. Here Praggu had to play now the move knight to e2, but now Magnus Carlsen simply plays rook to c4, attacks also now this weak pawn on d4. So here maybe you can also play, I think, rook to c2. It was, in my opinion, a line that could have led into completely winning game, I think, here for black, especially because of this 2 versus 1 situation on the queen side. So this is now a perfect endgame. But okay, here Magnus played rook to c4, Praggu took, and still Magnus Carlsen challenged the knight in this way, and he's trying now to take out the pawn on d4. So we have king to f1, bishop takes e2, king takes e2, and now rook to e4. So let's see now how Magnus will play this endgame, because in the previous game Praggu had a winning chance in their beautiful endgame they played. So rook to d4, now Magnus is making further progress with an extra pawn. So king to f2, we have rook to d2, king to g3, Magnus pushed the pawn further here to a4, a3, and now a rook to d3, attacking now also this weak pawn. So we have a rook to b5, king to g7. Magnus is now trying to get the king here closer to e5 or maybe to e6, and then to grab another pawn. If that happens, if Magnus creates now 2 passers, then the game, I think, is over for sure. So we have a rook to b4, we have a rook takes a3, but now after rook to d4 the pawn cannot be protected anymore, but at least Magnus is getting closer now with the king. So a rook to d5, a rook to c3. Magnus is trying now to play this Tarrasch rule. The Tarrasch rule says that you should bring your rook behind your pawn, so he's trying now rook to c7, maybe rook to a7, and just push the pawn further. So that's why rook to a5. The Tarrasch rule says also that you should also bring your rook behind your enemy's pawns, and that's exactly what Praggu did. He's now at least stopping for a while the progress of black's pawn. So we have now a3, king to f4, king to e6, and after move h4 we have now here f6 by Magnus Carlsen, so he's not allowing this king to get closer. So here king to e4 was played by Praggu, and he's at least keeping the king in the game, and this should be actually sort of the drawish position. Magnus had, I think, some better chances to play the middle game stage, especially when he had this beautiful battery on the e file. Now if Praggu plays this game correctly, this should probably end in a draw. So after king to e4, Magnus proceeded here with the move h5, tries to make some kind of a dynamic here on the king side, but of course king to d4, attacking further the rook. Magnus plays now rook to b3, king to c4, and now Magnus makes a decision. He's giving up this pawn on a3, but just in order to grab this pawn. He hoped that maybe Praggu went too far away from the action with the king, so he tried now in the first move, so you saw he tried to deflect the king towards the queen side. Now when he thought that the king is too far away, now finally after rook takes a3 Magnus Carlsen took, but now Praggu is of course getting towards the pawn, and even if you try to attack it, still we can protect it with king to e4. So that's why Magnus played g5, h takes g5, f takes g5, king to e3, h4, rook king to a6, and rook to a6 attacking the king, and this is now a completely drawish position. White can always deliver some checks. This is the king is simply too far away, the king is always cut off. The only route to escape is of course to get to h5 to maybe not allow further checks by the rook, but then the rook will come on the 8th rank, and here the rook will simply create checks from behind. So as I said, this is what exactly happened. King to f5, a couple of checks. Now the king went to h5, but now the rook is coming here behind. Here Magnus tried not to do some annoying checks here on the 3rd, maybe 2nd rank. Praggu simply delivered a check. King to g6 was played, and now a beautiful drawish line, f4 played by Praggu. This is the way to go, simply splitting the pawn chain, this 2 connected passers. So here after move h3, Magnus Carlsen took also here on g5. Praggu played of course king to f3, because you don't want to take of course rook to h3, then you get this one and the game is over. So this was the last trick sort of by Magnus Carlsen. After king to b4, king to f3, h2, and after king to g3, rook to a2, king to h2, rook to h2 here, this position of course the game ended in a draw. So really wild game it was for sure. I think so far it's a fair draw, although I think Pragu should have won the first game and Magnus Carlsen should have won the second game, but the games ended in a draw. So still, as I said, a fair draw. Still 2 more games to go, so it will be incredible battle between the 2 of them. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really interesting ideas of the Ragos defense of the Alekhine variation. If you want to also see the previous game, check out also our coverage. Really it has been so far a brilliant match game between the 2 of them. So see you soon with some more videos, and as I always like to say, chess is the best, of course.